Hello, welcome everyone, and appreciate you coming back and working with us today. This is, I think, one of my favorite classes that we put together. I just want to first echo what Jessica said, which is if you can and you've appreciated these classes, you've learned something along the way, you think they've been interesting, and you could share them out with a family member, a friend, or like a small community if you have a listserv or something, like we'd appreciate it because the more people that participate in the program, and we could actually offer this up to 20, 30, 40 participants. Like we could scale this class up. That's how it's designed. And the more participation and people who view those YouTube links, it'll help with perhaps the donor or the sponsorship and continuing the program to explore other cuisines or even take a different format. So if you can do that, I'd appreciate it. So today's class is on Mediterranean cuisine. So by Mediterranean cuisine, sometimes if you buy like a Mediterranean cookbook or you check out a Mediterranean cookbook from the library, it will focus on the countries of Europe. So Spain, France, England, or I'm sorry, my bad. Spain, France, Italy, Greece, and kind of that trifecta that's kind of that northern border of the Mediterranean. But when we talk about Mediterranean diet and Mediterranean cuisine in terms of this class, we're talking about also extending over to the countries of Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and kind of all throughout up until you hit Egypt and North Africa. So these cuisines share some things in common. They have some differences as well, but they all have some type of flatbread. They all have some type of herbaceous like sauce or like a deep green herby sauce. They utilize a lot of eggplant, tomato, peppers, onions, garlic, some of the crops they grow really well in those climates. And they also, as a balancing template, one of the things I want to talk about tonight is their sense of balance related to fresh lemon juice, salt, and chili pepper. So some blending of really three of the big flavor agents. So salt, sour from the lemon juice, and then spicy. So those three things in balance unite a lot of dishes from this region. So as far as the nutritional part with the Mediterranean diet, you may have seen nutrition books about the Mediterranean diet. What it really means, just to boil it down to its essence, is a diet that's heavy in fruits and vegetables. So that's the primary component of most dishes is fresh whole fruits or vegetables. There will be use of a grain item, often a whole grain. Like in this case, we have this bulgur wheat that we're going to be working with, or a pasta, whether whole grain or white pasta, like we talked about last week, or rice, sometimes a rice dish as well. And then that's all unified. And then meat is included as an option in most meals, but usually in a smaller quantity. And the meat item is not the main thing. It may be, for example, sliced marinated chicken breast, grilled and put on top of a salad, like a tabbouleh salad we're making tonight, or slow cooked beef kind of pulled and put on toast with an appetizer, but meat is sort of one element of the dish, but not necessarily the main component like we have on a lot of United States dishes. The other characteristics of the Mediterranean diet are heavy use of what we call one of the healthiest fats, which is olive oil. So we're going to be using some olive oil today. So that's the rich oil, very nutritious and more nutritious and good for your body than like a straight vegetable oil. So olive oil is also what's attributed to the fact that people seem to live longer in those regions. As one element. Granted, they also live by the sea and in a nice environment and a nice climate. So there's all sorts of things. Eating outdoors is very common in the Mediterranean. So I did live in Italy for a year as an exchange student in my high school years when I was 17, and I just remember eating outside whenever we could, which I think is one cool thing that translates well to Colorado, because here in Colorado, most nights in the summer, if you can stay up late enough for it to cool down, you could have a nice like dining al fresco or outdoors. So yeah, I'm going to go next into an ingredient introduction. So we're going to talk about a few of the things we'll be working with. We do have a flatbread today. It's a pita bread, fresh homemade pita bread. So a little bit similar to the naan that we made if you were on the Indian class with naan, but it does not have the baking powder addition and it doesn't use yogurt. So the pita bread, I'll show you that process. And we're going to roast some vegetables that we'll incorporate in the other dishes and talk a little bit about that technique about how to roast, especially like kind of fire smokily roast a vegetable and get that flavor into the vegetable or the dip that you're making. So we can go over to the board here. Actually, if we could just go cut to this one, Jessica can talk through some of this. So there we go. mostly centered. So first we'll start with this bulgur wheat. So this is a whole grain wheat that is super simple to make. It's like even easier than couscous if you've made couscous. You literally take a 1-to-1 ratio of the dry bulgur, which again I bought at King Supers. This is the brand I found, red bulgur. And you add the same amount of boiling water. So I just boiled 2 cups of water in my teapot and poured it right over 2 cups of dry bulgur. Add a touch of oil and salt, and you're good to go. This is now ready to be mixed in with our tabbouleh. So we'll come back to that. A few other ingredients today. These are the 2 peppers that we'll be roasting. They both just lend themselves well to oven roasting and kind of a smokiness because they have a skin that's thick and burly enough to be really put over a very high heat and blister, but then also at the same time cook the inside of the vegetable. So we're going to work with the eggplant and the red bell pepper. Tomatoes, again, find their way into most dishes one way or another. It's an option. You can add one to the muhammara, which is one of the dips we'll be making. You can also slice it up and mix it in with the tabbouleh. So those are good for a couple of purposes. One of the more unusual ingredients, or somewhat more expensive ingredients, I would say, is this tahini. Although I would say the pricing on it changes depending where you go. So the cheapest version I could find at King Supers was like $8.99. Granted, you only need a couple of tablespoons at a time if you're making hummus at home. But if you go to a Middle Eastern store that carries this a lot, you might be able to find that same size for $5 or $6. So it's kind of like how far do you want to look and check. You can also use, I have, even in the school system, with kids, I've used peanut butter or sunflower seed butter. I would actually say sunflower seed butter is a really good correlate if you can't find tahini or just want to stay away from it or have a sesame allergy. So that actually works fine for this. So any kind of fatty nut butter could work. But tahini is the traditional. This, by red peppers crushed, I just mean to illustrate almost every nation has this and uses this almost like a condiment. Like, you know how we use salt and black pepper? Red chili flakes, you can pretty much take and find in any country and add them to a dish. So it might just vary a little on the heat and the type of chili. We're working with walnuts in the muhammara, which I've pre-toasted. You don't have to toast them for the recipe, but it adds a little more depth of flavor. We have the scallions, which we'll be using in 2 different dishes, and then fresh lemon juice. So kind of the ingredient introduction. And of course, we'll be using olive oil, parsley, a couple other vegetables too in the salad mix. Okay, I'm going to take a quick minute to ask any questions with that intro and that first overview of the Mediterranean diet. Chef's Corner, now's your chance. We'll give you another chance in 10 minutes. So,
yeah, we have a question.
what do we got?
With the different types of olive oils, is one better than the other? Or is there a recommendation on which one to use?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Could you put it back on the other camera just for a minute? Hi, yeah, great question. So the most common labels that you see, like if you look at the massive amount of, I mean, King Supers again has a ridiculous amount of olive oil, so it is confusing that whole wall. Extra virgin just means that it's the very first pressing of the olives. So it's usually characterized by less of the linoleic acids and other like acids that can come when the pit of the olives gets squeezed. The lowest grade or the most kind of low commercial grade that's used more for frying and some other things is pomace olive oil, and that's where the actual pits have really been like squeezed to extract any last oil from the pits. So that's known as being more bitter. So there's extra virgin, there's virgin, which is sort of the second pressing, or the next pressing, and then there's sort of a couple of like what's called light olive oils or lighter grade, which is just sort of a further pressing of the oil. So this is usually the greenest in color and the most flavorful. So good question. And in our country, most of the olive oil is imported from either Italy, Spain, Greece. Those 3 countries produce a large amount of the oil that we consume here.
Then we have another question. Can you make your own tahini?
You can. That's funny. I didn't get a chance to get to it today, but I did buy some sesame seeds. I think, again, the challenge, you can make it. You can certainly put sesame seeds and a touch of hot water in your blender, and basically that is tahini. The challenge is getting enough sesame seeds to make it worth it, because I bet this entire bottle would only shrink down to just a little bit of the tahini itself. And the other thing is most tahini is roasted or toasted, and they have an expert way to toast the sesame seeds like just right to coax that flavor and that nice roastedness out of them. It's hard to to toast sesame seeds at home, I can say from my own experience, and get them just right and not too under and not too burnt. So I would say if you want consistency, go for the tahini. If you want a challenge, a kitchen challenge, which it sounds like you might, I would say you can certainly try. Or if you have sesame seeds around, just add a touch of hot water and blend it until it just gets to a thick puree like a peanut butter. All right, so we are going to do, I also want tonight to kind of show you my flow and what I did in time order, because I don't want to kind of make it seem like this is all really simple and easy and you can just do this in an hour and clean up and have dinner, because I do some prep and advanced work. But tonight I want to invite you into my process and what I did in what order. So we're going to go back to the board and start with the pita bread sponge. And here, if you'd like, you can follow along with the recipe. I'm going to refer to it here as I go. So the first pita, again, slightly different than the naan, but not that different, because really we're just taking a bread, we're rising it quickly and then smashing it really flat and then putting it into a hot oven to kind of pop and rise up. So what it starts is with the sponge. So 1 cup of lukewarm water. Now this, when you say lukewarm, people stress about the water. Technically, yeast loves 90 to 110 degrees is what it loves and thrives in, with a little bit of sugar to feed on. But what I always say is if you've ever run like a bottle for a baby, or you just run the water on your inside of your wrist, kind of your sensitive part of your wrist, and it just feels kind of warm, lukewarm, that's usually a good measure. So that's what I did here, just adding a cup of that. So the yeast really needs 2 things to really activate. It's the moisture and the sugar. So some type of sugar to feed on. So we're going to add 2 teaspoons of dry yeast, which is a little bit less than 1 packet. So have the packet. You'd save the rest for another time in your fridge. Just put a clip on it. So 2 teaspoons. And you want to get this right. This is baking, so we want to make sure we're not just guessing here. We want to get this accurate and correct. So when it says teaspoon, I'm going to put a nice level teaspoon. 1 and 2. Set the rest of these aside. And then the sugar is just a half teaspoon. So really, it's not like adding a lot of sweetness to the dough. You probably won't even taste it in the final flavor. But it's going to spark the generation of the yeast activity. So 1/2 teaspoon. And then the reason it's called a sponge is this liquid measure, and you add the flour to kind of like create like a slightly wet mixture that's just gonna, you'll see, really take off with the fermentation and the yeast action. Just gonna whisk these together first. And then this is a little confusing in the recipe because there's only a 1/4 cup of the whole grain flour. Is here. So a 1/4 cup of the whole grain, which is all that's in the recipe total. 1/4 cup. Wow. So just enough to kind of soak up that liquid and create what we call the sponge. And then the cool thing is you can just mix this, sit it, and forget about it for 15 minutes. I love whenever in a recipe, it's like, okay, set aside for 15 minutes, set aside for 20 minutes. Because then you can think to yourself, what can I do next? What other recipes can I work on? So I think it's just time efficient. You got your sponge going, and we'll come back to it in just a few, and I'll show you how much it's bubbled and expanded. All right, so I set that timer for 15. Now the second piece I'd like to do, and I did in time today, was, as I said, the eggplant and the pepper. I don't particularly want to cut them in half, but I will say there's 3 different methods that you could use to roast these, and part of it depends on your taste and how you like the flavor of things. So let me go break this down. So the way I'm going to show is on the stovetop on a gas range. So I do have a gas range, which not everyone does. and I can do the direct cooking on the flame of these two items. So that I prefer. I also prefer a smokier flavor. So I'll show you in a minute. I'm going to char the heck out of these and just get their outsides very blackened, like almost blistered and blackened. But then you can run them under a little water and just use your hands to scrape off some of that blackness, and it won't be quite as smoky of a flavor. The second most smoky would be if you just put them on a grill outdoors. So if you have an open grill, you put them you could do a little oil, not too much. Don't have them sopping, but just toss them and move them around on the grill to get some of that flame. But you might not get quite that deep depth of the roast and smoke. The third way is if you don't have a grill, nor do you want that smoke and char, you could actually roast them in the oven at a lower temperature, like 350 or 400, just until they're soft and they kind of deflate. So there's those three options, ways to cook these for our recipes today. We're going to go over to the stove. So here we are at my gas range. And you know how you always have or on my gas range, there's always one that's hotter, one that's a little less hot. There's the one that's like too hot. I'm going to put this on like high on about one of the medium burners that cooks about the right heat. I'm going to show you visually the red pepper first, because I think it's just cooler and you can see a little more of the level of char that we're getting on the pepper. Move this red pot. So yeah, like this may feel a little strange at first. You're putting stuff directly on your oven, and I would say be careful because it can and has set off a smoke alarm before. If you have a hood over your stove, now would be a good time to put it on because you're going to generate some level of smokiness. So, and I'd say definitely the first time you do this, stay with it. There's certain indicators that it's working. Did you just hear a couple of pops? You might have seen some things. I'll show you what the bottom looks like to start. Nothing yet. We want to see visible blisters. I don't use oil for this because it just gets too messy. And yeah, so you're waiting to hear kind of a sizzle, a char. The way we're really going to know they're done is that you press on them with like the side of a tongue like this, and they'll sort of deflate and almost like turn more like two-dimensional. The asparagus would be a little trick. I'm sorry, my bad, mixing up words tonight. The eggplant's a little bit different because this one was one of the larger ones. I couldn't find a smaller or thinner, so this will take more time. So I'm actually going to start that one over here on my hotter burner. We can kind of look at them together. So I can talk a little about the eggplant and what we're doing with this. If you've ever had baba ganoush, so what's called baba ganoush, it's essentially, just think of it as like the eggplant version of hummus. So hummus, which we're going to be making in a few minutes, is essentially chickpeas, tahini, lemon, salt, garlic. Eggplant, if you substitute that for the chickpeas, it's called baba ganoush. And again, it's known for having kind of a smokier flavor and taste. If you like that, people tend to either really like that or not. So now you can see some char on the face of this pepper. So I'm just going to flip it. Most peppers have, 6 or 7 kind of faces or sides. So you'll end up kind of turning it a lot, letting it roll. This eggplant, I'll just give it a quarter turn every so often. You can probably see that it's already blackening on the bottom. This is a really high heat, so it's not going to take too long to blacken this one. When we're done with these in a couple of minutes, we're going to just take a pot like I have with a lid in it, a heavy lid or aluminum foil in it. Actually, here's my eggplant that I roasted earlier. So this can be, I'll show you kind of the end game is like this. So it's like, as you can see, thoroughly blackened, got some breaks in the skin. And when I press on it, it's like soft. So that's where eventually you can see we're getting to with the eggplant. And again, when you put it inside something and put a lid on it, or in a bowl even, it just keeps the heat and it kind of helps it finish cooking all the way through to the center. All right, any questions on this technique, or does this seem like doable? It's a little scary because you're basically just burning stuff. But I had an old chef mentor in Chicago who used to say, Stephen, you have to remember, cooking is the art of burning things slowly, which I still appreciate and remember. So I do think this is one of those cases. You want to get it just burnt, but not too burnt. Maybe like a marshmallow over a campfire. right, I'm going to turn these down a little, give them another quick flip. And this is, once you get good at it and you feel comfortable, this is something you can walk away from and kind of, you'll hear them and you'll smell touch of smoke and you'll know. So I'll come back to these, but in the meantime, to keep our flow going and kind of go back to what I did with my own flow on these dishes, let's go back and make the hummus. I used a blender for this. I happen to have a blender with like a pretty wide base. Food processor also works great. The blender may give you a little bit more smoothness if you can run it longer. It might get a little bit smoother if you like it that way, but you can also make the hummus and muhammar and baba ganoush a little chunkier if you'd like. So again, back to the 5 fundamental ingredients of what we're throwing in here today. We've got the garbanzo beans. I'm using canned. It's quite convenient. You can base a recipe on 1 or 2 cans and kind of get familiar with those ratios. You could also cook your own, of course. That's always an option with beans. So, and you might save a few pennies as well. So garbanzos. Now we got our salt. I just have a pink salt here. Lemon juice. And really, we're just focusing on achieving a balance of the lemon, the salt, and the olive oil. And at the end, we're going to spread it out on a plate with a touch of extra touch of olive oil and a bit of paprika, just red paprika, to kind of like pretty it up and make it ready to serve. And people can dip pita chips, the pita bread that we're making, other things like that. So people sometimes ask, is it worth using the liquid in the can? Well, you could for certain applications if you want like that thickness, kind of like you're thickening a soup with the juice of the garbanzos. But in this case, I think it just preserves kind of the purity of the bean flavor, to just drain them and then rinse them a little. So you just have the bean. So just give those a quick rinse. I bought the version that was already salted, so be aware whether you're using a bean that has been salted, unsalted, because that might affect how much salt you add. So I'm going to add these to the blender bowl. I've got garlic. Always a matter of taste on garlic. This recipe just calls for 1 clove, so that's what I'll use today. If you have a blender or a food processor that's really good and it's gonna like really whisk this and get the garlic mixed in well, you can just add the whole clove, and you don't have to do all the mincing and chopping. So that's what I did earlier, and it worked out all right. Add, let's see, touch of lemon juice, touch of olive oil, pinch of salt. We can always add salt later, right? That's my thought is we can always add more salt later. And then we're adding the tahini. So that tahini ingredient we talked about. So I actually I had kind of a mixed batch of tahini today because what happens is it's the type of ingredient that in my case, I tend to leave in the pantry for a while. And so I had some old dried up stuff that I used most of. I actually chipped it out and kind of used most and just added some water to it, which worked okay. But then I also had this brand new one that I had bought that's more like a nice smooth liquid. So I think this is just going to be better for this purpose. Kind of keep it moist and don't have any chunks in there. So, but again, the old stuff I used was fine too. It worked. All right, so there's your tahini. Here's where you could also add other elements. Like if you like roasted red pepper hummus at the store, well, now we know how to make roasted red pepper. You could throw some strips of red pepper in here and you'd have roasted red pepper hummus. If you wanted to add some herbs, basil, oregano, thyme, you could add at this point. So this is kind of your chance to make it interesting or fancy, or the first time, just make it straight hummus and see how it comes out. So I also had to add a bit of warm water to mine, so I'm going to do that now. Again, you could just add a little water at a time. You don't want it too watery, so I just added a touch about what I did earlier. So let me show you the finished product. And I'll show you kind of the way that I've always seen it presented. So again, texture is what's most important. So you want, if you've had store-bought or um, hummus like the Sabra or some other type, it should just be kind of like just thick enough to kind of dip onto a pita chip or something, but enough to like fall off your spoon. So this is, I think, a great texture. So this is how I've had it presented traditionally. Is you spread it on a plate. Again, it's typically a dish that's shared among a group. So I'm gonna lay it on about 3/4 inch thick. This is the way I had an Armenian friend growing up, an Armenian friend. Every time we went to her house, we would just sit and eat hummus like this. So good memories. So it adds a little bit of an artistic and a creative air, kind of like the stuff we're going to be talking about in our last class when we talk about food styling. So there's a dish. We've got a little olive oil just to make it shine and for healthfulness, as we say. Just a drizzle. And a touch of paprika. Just enough from up high to make it really sparkle and add like a little more depth of flavor. So like, how nice is that? Like to have that as a dish with some fresh pita bread or pita or some vegetable dip like carrots or celery. I mean, what a nice way to kind of greet people into your home and to your table. So I think hummus is one of those things that most people like, including children and older adults, and everybody kind of has. The American public has gotten the taste for hummus, and I don't think it's going away because it's really good and nutritious. So that's that. The other dish, the baba ganoush that I mentioned, the recipe that's in our book is more of a fancy version of that, where you take the roasted eggplant and slice it and you grate some tomatoes over it, and you kind of have all the elements. It's almost like a deconstructed baba ganoush. But I would encourage you first. That was kind of a fancy one, so I'm not going to make that for the demo tonight. But I think it's nice to have like the hummus and then have the baba ganoush next to it as like an alternative, a different thing. And I've had people who don't even claim to like eggplant and they like baba ganoush because it is that similar to hummus and that flavor. So that's that. The other dip that we're making is a little more unusual. So I'm going to walk us through that, the muhammara. So some of the elements of the muhammara that are a little different are the walnuts. Again, someone had asked me once, could we use a different nut in place? You could, but again, walnuts are traditional. You could certainly try with hazelnuts. I have had it made with hazelnuts and it's very good as well. So I think those nuts would work well. We got the fresh scallions. I'm adding a tomato to today's mixture. You don't have to. It's not in the technical recipe, but it can add a little bit more body and just like a fresh flavor to it. But roasted red pepper is actually like the main ingredient in this one. So we'll focus on that. Actually, I just went to turn the roasted red pepper and it's just got one more side to go. So we'll come back to the muhammara. But right now is actually my 15-minute timer just went up and our sponge is looking good. So back to the sponge. It should be similarly wet, but should have more volume. It should have almost doubled in size, and you can probably see it's kind of bubbly. It's almost like it's effervescent because that yeast is working. So now at this point in the recipe, you add the remaining ingredients. So the salt, the remainder of the white flour, and the olive oil. So teaspoon kosher salt. Because if sugar stimulates the yeast, it's salt that slows it down or slows down the growth of the yeast. So we actually do want to slow it down at this point as we add more flour as well. We're going 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And then we're adding the rest of the flour, which is also going to slow down the growth of this to a reasonable point where we can form more of a dough with this. Approximately 2 cups. Quarter more. What I would encourage you to do is take the whisk out. It's not going to work much with all this flour. just knead it with your hand. It says chopstick or spoon. I prefer my hand so I can kind of see if it's coming together. Like a lot of dough recipes, what you want to get to is a point where it's what's called shaggy. And we're actually getting there right now. I do want to point this out because it's kind of a cool pastry thing. If you see, it's got like a shagginess where it almost looks like a shaggy dog, but it kind of holds together. That's where you want to be at. Say the dough should be shaggy. And that shows we've got about the right content of moisture versus flour. Maybe this for about a minute. So I'll touch more water now. You're just kneading it to get all the ingredients incorporated. And then we're going to let it set for. And I have a dough that's been sitting that we'll come to in a minute. I'll kind of show you how the finished product looks. All right, so I'm going to turn this out. All right, and in the meantime, our roasted red pepper is ready for the muhammara. So again, you can feel very soft. You can see it's very dark blistered. Like it looks burnt. Like someone might look at that and think, oh, that's done. That's overdone. But what's gorgeous is inside the flesh now has been given the smokiness and the fire type flavor, but it doesn't actually taste charred. So that's kind of the delicate nuance of this flavor. So normally I would say let this rest for a little bit. Sake of expediency, open it up. Don't burn yourself. You can actually get a steam burn from inside here. You can see it's coming out hot. So I'm just going to take out the seeds portion at the top. And I'm going to run the rest of the pepper under hot water, or sorry, under cold water, just to cool it down so that I can touch it and add it to our muhammara. All right, so here's the part where you can kind of choose your level of smokiness. So if you like smoke, if you like a little bit of char in your food, you could take all these black elements and put those in your blender or food processor as well. I'm not going to. I'm just going to mostly peel those off and just strip down the pepper itself. But you can see it's fully cooked. It's like flabby. It's been 100% cooked, so there's none of that rawness left. It's taken on a whole new flavor. So I'm just breaking it down into quarters. That is like the basis for the muhammara. That's kind of what makes it muhammara, is that roasted pepper as the start. So we've got the roasted pepper. We've got the walnuts. Again, I pre-toasted. You could toast or not. We have the scallions. Again, more olive oil. Again, it becomes a matter of blending this and working on the balance of flavors, because it does have also a bit of lemon juice and a bit of the hot red chili pepper. So once again, same balance. I made a batch of this earlier, and I'll show you the finished product in a minute, but roughly, like for me, it was about a pinch of the pepper. Put in one whole tomato in the blender. I just chuck it in, or chop it up, whatever your blender can handle. Olive oil. You might need to add more olive oil at the end, but that's always an option. You got your scallion. And walnuts. Lemon juice. Just salt. Again, you can always add more salt at the end. So this is the muhammara mix. I'll show you what the finished product looks like, and then we'll make the tabbouleh, which is the last of the cold dishes. So see. So muhammad. Again, kind of a thick paste. I added breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs are listed as optional, I believe. You could add breadcrumbs to thicken it, and you can add like a kind of a cool, interesting toasted flavor. You can toast your own. I just use panko breadcrumbs, untoasted. And so again, it's thickened up quite a bit just being in the fridge in the last like hour. So the one is almost more, as you can see, kind of like a thicker texture. But that's primarily because I added those breadcrumbs and it kind of like stiffened it up and absorbed the moisture. So again, what can you do? Dress it up, make it a little shiny, a little olive oil. You could add paprika, you could add other spices. I might add a touch of cumin, since there's cumin in the sauce as well. Just add a tap of that. And then you can surround this with, ideally, in our case, our fresh pita bread. So that's what we're going to actually go back to and roll out now. And then we're going to finish with the tabbouleh. So let's get back to our pita. If we could, Jessica, switch to the other screen. This is our pita, the remaining dough that I had rolled out earlier. I'm just going to show you here quickly what I'm doing and about what the size that we're baking off. So I do want to show you. Oh, I'm not just showing off my knife there. That's not what this is for. We're showing techniques. So, so you take these and just roll them into like a small ball, like kind of like making a dinner roll, or almost like a dinner roll size. And then you just add flour if you need to, roll it out. And again, this dough's been sitting over an hour at this point out. So you should have plenty of pop to it. Hopefully, as soon as it hit the oven, we'll get some yeast rise action from these. So the directions, interestingly, on this one are to have a really hot oven. 475 is what it says. It's pretty extreme, and it tells you to put that the baking dish inside the oven early so that it's hot, and then you can throw this right on the hot surface. So I'm doing that option. So I'm just kneeling down to my oven. It doesn't have to be 475. That's pretty extreme. Some people's ovens don't go that high, or like it starts to give a burning smell at that temperature. So you could also do 425, 450, just for a little longer. But the idea is you get some browning on these pitas, you get some flavor, and they pop a little and kind of create a pocket. That's the goal. We'll see how we do. So I'm going to toss these in the oven here. So what we got with the tabbouleh, last week we had talked about parsley and cut some parsley. I actually got a little bit of each type of parsley just to show that difference today. We have the Italian flat leaf parsley here, and what's known as curly parsley, and there's a little more commonly found here. They're the same. Like, they're essentially the same flavor profile. If you chop them up a lot, like you do for this recipe with the tabbouleh, it really doesn't make a difference. So I'm just going to do a combo. I'm going to show you guys that technique one more time for how to cut down a big mess of herbs. So most importantly, the herbs should not be soaking wet. So I washed them earlier and dried them with a paper towel. So they're not soaking wet, because that just turns them into like a wet mush. Again, best technique, keep the front of your knife down on the board, and just chop through it. But you're basically moving the knife through this pile. Parsley is a little bit unwieldy at first. It's got a lot of volume, but just keep going. Keep regrouping it, reshaping it. So we get to like a nice chop that is not going to need too much, and it's just going to make a nice salad mixed in with the bulgur wheat. Oh, and I always want to try to include a great job for kids. And I think a great job for kids in this recipe is picking parsley off the stems. Because you don't want this all stemmy. You'd rather have the leaves. You don't want a bunch of stems we'll have to chew on. I'm feeling good about this. It's broken down. They're in pretty small pieces. I'm not seeing any whole leaves left. I like this, and I'm ready to mix it with the bulgur. Yeah, the ratio is kind of a matter of personal preference, but I'm doing about 1-to-1 in terms of volume, parsley versus bulgur wheat. And now, once again, it's about the balance. So we're trying to balance this with the lemon, salt, spice if you'd like, but typically just lemon, salt, and oil. Put that. I would say the best way to kind of say how much to add of this is add your oil first. Make it a little shiny like you would if you were tossing like a pasta salad. Just enough to kind of keep it loose. Lemon juice, I like a lot of lemon juice, as long as it's balanced with salt. So I do a fair amount of lemon juice and salt. Mix well. If it doesn't have enough flavor, try adding a little more olive oil before you add more salt. So that's my tip. Maybe the flavor is just not carried by enough fat to kind of bring it to full flavor on your tongue. So I like this, really, really good. Now, what goes with this in my world? Lettuce, garden lettuce, and tomatoes and cucumbers. So for me, this is like a beautiful salad. Woo, just getting the hot pita out of the oven. So here's how I would plate this salad. Go. Lay some of these as like a base or a bed, because people kind of get tired of green salads. I think it's a super nice way to have like a small dinner party, healthy way to like serve a friend, just like a really nice meal, but at a low cost and like super healthy. So we're gonna go tabbouleh, kind of pile on top of that. Serve this with a fork. So kind of make a bed. And meanwhile, the olive, the lemon, and the salt are almost like going down into that and sort of forming its own dressing. Same here. I've been marinating these cucumbers and tomatoes with vinegar and oil. So I'll lay some of these on top. Using some produce you have, oil and fresh, and there it is. So again, if you're a meat eater, if for you dinner involves meat, you could grill some chicken, put that on top, grill some beef, any type of chicken, you could just put that on the grill, put with this, it'd be great. If you have the muhammara done, if you have the hummus done, you could put a little dollop of each here and here, and you have like a very satisfying meal. Smooth those and check out pita. So the pita bread, I'm actually going to slice it now. Just give it a minute to kind of steam off. See how we did. So if you cut it into whatever size, it's kind of easy to dip. So let's go quarters. It looks like to me, it's got a little pocket in there, but you kind of see that's nice if you get that pocket, but it could have used maybe another minute of cooking because it could have gotten some nicer like browning on the outside, but it did pop a little pocket for us. If you get really good at making pita, then you could actually serve them more like a gyros or falafel, or actually serve it more like a sandwich. So, but for now, that's that. This is delicious. Like, just try this one, even if you just try this one with Amara if you've never had it. Really, really good, and I think a nice summer dish too. It just doesn't take much, and it can represent the bulk of the meal paired with pita chips or fresh pita. So, all right, so we got that plate. I'll just put out all our plates, and then we'll have questions. Here's the tabbouleh dish. So, real time, like I know I've been doing these classes for a while, and like I just don't want to pretend like this all can whip together in an hour when it's really two. But like these dishes that you see before you, I think definitely you can do in an hour, with the slight exception of the pita bread, which is going to be a little bit longer just because you have to do that little process. But you can start that and start the fun for the pita before you even really start cooking and doing the rest of the prep. So So that is kind of the bulk of what I had today, but I'd love to take some questions and what else we can talk about.
Thank you so much, Chef Steven. So we do have a question. Um, if you wanted to add toppings or other flavors to the hummus, when would be the best time or what would be the best way to incorporate that?
Yeah, great question. I think so. What I would say is if you're new to making hummus, just try to make the base recipe first. Like I would say, this recipe is a good one that I used here and that you can use at home. The hardest thing is to know the texture, but just kind of get it to a texture that's recognizable from hummus you've had before, and that'll be it, right? And then you can alter the flavor as needed. I think work on the base hummus, try it. What I'd recommend is because you don't want to like totally mess it up and have it just not be good, is maybe take half of that batch or maybe make a double batch of the simple, make it really good, then take some out and then try it with, let's say, roasted beets is a popular one. It makes it purple, right? That bright purple you might have seen. Roasted red pepper is a popular one. You could add more cumin if you like that flavor. You could add cumin seeds to make it kind of pop. Like, yeah. I think variations on a theme are awesome, but I think it's good to get their base balance and like a solid recipe, and you're like, okay, good, I got this, and now let me try a variation or something else.
We have another question. Is there a substitute you recommend for the eggplant? Someone says they've really tried but do not like it.
Yeah, if you're just not an eggplant person, I get it. I respect that. I think maybe that's where again, try the hummus. If you like garbanzo beans or not. I mean, because hummus is a whole different creation, right? You might not like garbanzo beans per se because of the texture or the whole bean, but just try the hummus first base recipe. Try a variation on that. I mean, if it's not eggplant, then it's not muhammara, then it's more like an eggplant, right? You could use white beans. I have seen white bean hummus. So some people prefer a softer, more mild textured cannellini bean or white bean out of a can. That's totally doable and makes like a whiter shade of hummus, which is cool. Um, yeah, so I think that's what I would do.
And we have another question. Somebody shares that they've had headaches after eating eggplant and has been recommended to soak it in salt before cooking. Do
Hmm.
you have any tips for cooking the eggplant?
Yeah, so I come at it from a slightly different background, so I'll just kind of say what I know or what I've done in the past. So yes, I've salted eggplant, for example, for eggplant parmesan. It breaks down the texture, and what salt does essentially is pulls water out of vegetables. So if you sprinkle them and let them kind of sit out on a tray, you'll see water will draw to the surface. They'll become more dense and kind of squished down and actually become a different texture. So not quite as spongy and like that sort of texture. And then you can wash the salt off, and then only some of the salt stays in them, and you don't really need to salt them. So I have seen that. As far as the headaches, I can't say like clinically what that could be, but I do know some people have slight allergies to the nightshade family, which includes eggplants. So you might want to just inquire or ask about that if you have a practitioner that might know about it. I've never actually heard that the association of salt with the headache reduction. I've heard it associated with a bitterness, a reduction in bitterness, and a change of texture, but not specifically linked to any health condition or headache. I'm just going to put it out there real quick because we have a few minutes. Has anyone on the call ever traveled to one of these countries or been in the household of someone who's cooked these type of dishes, the eggplant, the baba ganoush, that kind of Middle Eastern Mediterranean style of food? Or do you have any experience with it? Good or bad, either like traveling to that part of the country or having friends that cook with these dishes.
Someone mentioned turkey.
Turkey. What do you remember? Again, I can't see the comments, but what do you recall of the food of Turkey? That's where you visited.
When I was in southern Spain a few years ago, there was a huge Mediterranean influence in the food. A lot of olive oil used as well. Which brings me to ask if somebody couldn't have olive oil, would any type of oil be a good substitute? Do you have a recommendation for a substitute in place of olive oil?
Yeah, there's a lot of oils on the market these days. I mean, I would probably just stay away from like a canola or a vegetable oil just because it doesn't have a lot of flavor and it doesn't really add much to a dish in terms of flavor. There's like oils made from algae now. There's oils made from various seeds. There's like walnut oil and almond oil and different types of oil like that. You just want to check the smoke point on them, which means the point at which it begins to smoke and very quickly after spontaneously combust. Because if you're using it in a high heat application, and you're trying to saute a vegetable or something like that and it has too low of a smoke point, it's just going to have a little bit of a burnt acrid flavor. So you might kind of want to check that before you were to try one of those other ones. But they're great. And I guess I did want to mention on this call too, since this is community food share and this is a community organization that does great good and brings people together, that this whole style of cooking also reminded me that many other countries just have a different approach to food and a different approach to enjoying food with neighbors and family and friends. I think sometimes we get stuck in our American household life of just eat dinner and you just sit down, eat, and go to bed. But in some of these countries, I really like and respect kind of the communal aspect of what's going on and the importance of the social element of eating. Um, I think it's been shown to be one of, research based, that it's been shown to be one of the most important ways to ward off depression and some mental health stuff is just to be with others and be socially with others, including at meal times. And so I really like this style of food because it's sort of a grazing tapas mezze sort of approach. And I think it just invites company and just invites good feelings and people leave feeling good. Like I really do think that when people enjoy a healthier meal that's not as heavy as some of our traditional American meals, I think people feel it like, wow, I feel really good after eating that food. So I think this is one of those cuisines. So.
To add to that turkey comment,
Hmm.
the second comment in response was amazing, love the street food and culture around community meals, which goes to the point that you just brought up. And I would say that I found the same in my experience in Spain, is that all meals were shared, and it was a lot less common to see somebody eating alone. But I think that their culture just allows for that to be more accepted.
Yeah, agreed. All right. I want to sell, if I could, the last couple classes. If anyone has any final questions, feel free to pop them in. But I want to sell the last two classes. So next week, unfortunately, I'm on the road and just didn't work out alignment wise, schedule wise. So I will not be around. We're not having class next week. But the following week, July 31st, I will be conducting class from Michigan. Actually, I have an in-laws kitchen, so I'll be in a different space. But I'll be doing a class on Southeast Asian cuisine. So we're going to talk about Thai, Vietnamese food. We're gonna do some Vietnamese noodle wraps, like those nice, really delicious kind of fresh Vietnamese spring rolls with fresh herbs. We're gonna work through that and some sauces. And so that should be a really fun class from a different region. And then we are that following week, we're going to be advertising soon, and there'll be a questionnaire survey. But we'd love if you could attend and could make it to an in-person class. And at that class, we will be doing. Each of you will bring some dish representative of your culture, your background, your family, your culinary history, and we'll just sit and eat together. I'll have a short class prepared on food styling, food photography, and plate presentation, just even to apply to your home and how to make things look and sparkle and look good on the plate. And that'll wrap this course. So I really, really appreciate everyone being on this call and couldn't do without you. And I hope you're taking something from each class. So please, if you could complete the survey after, and we hope to see you at those two for upcoming classes.
Yeah, and we just have one last comment and
Yep.
one question. So somebody else mentioned that Mediterranean food feels like a warm hug. And then there was a question of, do you have any recommendations for making stuffed grape leaves, which would pair nicely with these Mediterranean dishes?
Dolma, stuffed grape leaves. I love them. I love eating them. I don't have any great tips on how to make them. I know there are some labor involved, especially if you start with fresh grape leaves and do the pickling and do all that process. Then you got to start, I think, a couple of days ahead. But you can also buy the grape leaves already prepared and ready to roll. And then I know there's just sort of almost like a sticky rice mixture that you're putting and packing inside each one. Oh, you just made me hungry. I gotta go find some of this. But yes, I think it would go perfectly with these. Just a nice little lineup of those grape leaves. People love those, and you can use meat in those as well. You can use ground lamb, ground beef, mix it in with the rice, and delicious.
And we will have our potluck culminating our classes the first week of August. So keep an eye out for more information on that. The RSVP for it on Eventbrite is already up.
Yeah, be well, everyone. Happy cooking. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you all.